Hi, it's Carolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, and in this video I'm going to show you how to decorate this cupcake candy themed cake. And like always, I'm starting with my cakes already baked, filled, iced, and it's in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. I have tons of videos showing you how I do that process, and that will be linked below. And also all of the tools that I use and any other videos that I reference will be linked below as well. And I will also let you know how much I charged for this cake. So let's get started. All right, we're going to start by baking the top of the cupcake. So I have some pan grease on here. I have a video showing you how I make my pan grease, and I will link that below. But I'm just getting a little pastry brush and brushing the light coating of it in there, making sure I get in all the crevices, pour the batter in, and then I'm putting it in the oven, and I'm going to bake it at 350 and check it after about 45 minutes. And then once that's done, I let it cool for about 5 minutes, and then I'm lightly wrapping it in plastic and putting it in the freezer. Now we want to make the liner. So I have this bag of meltables. I got them at Michael's, and I want to melt them in the microwave for about a minute. And I'm lightly spraying some canola oil on here and then taking a paper towel and getting rid of the excess. If you have too much oil in here, the chocolate won't stick. It's going to slide down. So that is melted, and I'm pouring that in here. And then I just want to lift it up and turn it so I can completely coat this entire thing with the chocolate. So I'm adding a little more and just making sure that all of the sides are coated, and making sure that it comes all the way up to the top as well. And then I'm taking a paper towel and just removing the excess, and I want to put that in the refrigerator for about 5 minutes. And then I'm taking a piping tip and cutting a hole in there because we need a place for the dowel to go. And now I want to put that back in the refrigerator for about a half hour, and then I'm going to melt some more of these chocolates. And then you could see how some of the chocolate slid down the side because of that oil on there. So we have to do a couple coats on here. So let's do the second coat. I'm pouring in that melted chocolate, and again, I'm getting it all the way up the sides, making sure I get it all the way to the top. And then I'm going to take a paper towel and just clean that top edge, and I'm going to put that in the refrigerator for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, I'm going to take that piping tip again and try to cut that circle out. And it was kind of sticking, so I just took a knife and just scooped all of that chocolate out of there and put that back in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes. And then again, I'm melting more and doing the same thing. So I'm going to have about 3 coats of this chocolate on here, so it's going to be thick enough and it won't break. Again, after 5 minutes, I'm cutting out that hole in the center and then putting that back in the refrigerator for about 2 hours. And now I have a 6-inch cake circle that I taped to a 12-inch cake drum, and I removed that. I thawed that, so it's not frozen, it's room temperature, and I'm just slicing the top part. And I'm getting a little bit of chocolate down onto the board so this will stick and it won't slide around. And then I'm getting a little bit of vanilla icing in the middle. I feel like it's too tall. Like I like to break it up with a little bit of filling in there. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. And I'm just going to rewrap that and set that aside, keep it out at room temperature to settle. And then once I was ready to continue, I am just adding a thin layer of icing around the outside. So I don't want it too thick. I don't want it too thin. I'm going to be covering this with fondant, but I'm making sure that the icing is coming all the way down to that cake board, and then I'm going to smooth it out. So I'm just taking my spatula and removing the excess, and I have found the easiest way to do this is to use your hand. So I'm dipping my hand in hot water and just running it over the top to smooth it out. It's difficult to do this with a spatula. I just find it so much easier just to use your hand. And then once I have that done, I'm taking my spatula and refining that bottom edge, making sure that it's coming down to the cake board. And let's put that in the refrigerator. Now, my hands are always clean when I handle my cakes. I got that out of the refrigerator, and let's stack this. So I'm using my small ruler to measure how tall the straws should be. And then I'm going to cut that marker off and throw that piece away, and then stick those other pieces of the straw in the bottom tier. Make sure that everything is level and get some buttercream icing down. And then I'm going to put the top tier on. That cardboard circle is going to sit atop the straws so it won't collapse. Now I have a video where I go into complete detail on how I stack my cakes, and that will be linked in the description. This was a little offset. It wasn't level, so I had to get a little bit more icing down on the left side to lift it up a little bit, and now that cake is sitting level. So now I have a wet paper towel, and I'm just cleaning that excess icing off of the cake board before I start to decorate this. And when I was icing this cake, a little bit of water dripped down the side, and you can kind of see the imperfection in the icing there where my bench scraper was a little too hot and it changed the color in the cake. However, I'm going to decorate the cake. You're barely going to be able to notice that. No, I have Gumtex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's all basically the same thing. I mix a little bit into my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. Store-bought fondant is way too soft and I feel like it doesn't set hard enough. So I sprinkle a little bit into my marshmallow fondant, knead it in there, roll it out, let it sit. It's going to set harder. It's going to make it stretchy. It's going to make it smooth. I love this stuff. I never make fondant without it. I will find the Tylose powder and link that in the description for you. Now, I rolled this white fondant out pretty thin along with all of these different colors, and I'm using my ribbon cutter to cut pretty thick ribbons that I'm going to wrap around the base of the cake. And then I have this tip number 12, and I'm cutting a bunch of these little circles. It's going to kind of be like candy dot. You know those dot candies? That's what I'm doing. So I need to cut a bunch of different circles in all the other colors, and that took forever. And let's set those aside. Now let's get these borders on. So I'm starting in the back, wrapping it around the bottom of the cake, and where it meets in the back, I'm cutting off the excess and then pressing the seam together. And I'm doing the same thing for the top tier. So I've got a little bit of water on the cake and then wrap that around there so the fondant sticks to it. Now you have to individually put all of these little dots on here, and it is a little time consuming. So you don't see me doing this, but that paintbrush that I have in my hand, I'm dipping it in water, getting a little bit of water behind each dot, and then evenly placing these on the cake. So each color, there's going to be 3 by 3, and then I'm going to start on the next color. And I am sitting eye level with the cake to make sure that all of these are nice and evenly spaced out. And then look at the purple icing. You can see condensation is starting to form. I had to crank up my air. It was just too warm in my house. So I'm going to put that cake back in the refrigerator for about an hour to get rid of that condensation. So in the meantime, I'm going to make the jimmies or sprinkles. If you're from Philly, you say jimmies. So I'm cutting really thin lines into this fondant, and then I'm going the other way and I'm cutting like long thin rectangles, and these are going to be the jimmies that go on top of the cupcake. So I did that in a bunch of all of the colors that I had rolled out earlier. And I'm going to set those aside with all those dots that I made earlier to go on the borders. Now, I got this out of the refrigerator. It was in there for about an hour, and I can easily lift that up because that was lined with, I sprayed the oil down there, so it easily released from the pan. And you can see it's pretty thick. It's holding its shape, and I'm just putting it on the plate because I ran out of cutting boards. And I'm going to set that aside out at room temperature. And now I'm going to continue. So that was in the refrigerator for about, I think it was like 35 minutes to 40 minutes. But I'm just finishing putting all of these on here, and that probably took over an hour for me to do. And I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now, I'm using purple fondant for this because I had some purple fondant left over and I didn't want it to go to waste. So rather than just using white fondant for this swirl, I decided to go with purple, just so I wasn't wasting fondant. You can use white fondant if you want. You'll understand what I mean as I talk you through this. So I'm rolling this out and making sure that it is an even thickness, probably about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. And I want to make sure that it is really long. We're going to wrap this around the top of the cupcake. I cut each end on an angle. That way it tapers when I put it around here. And then I got that out of the refrigerator. That icing is cold and hard. I got water behind that back part of the purple strip that I'm sticking to the cake. And I'm carefully wrapping this around here, trying to make sure that there's an equal distance in between all of those rows. So as I lift it up, I'm just trying to make sure that it looks nice and even. And look at that. That was long enough. I usually don't do that on the first try. So now I'm just taking my fingers and making sure that it looks nice and even. And I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I'm making the lollipops. So I'm rolling out white and a color. So I do white and pink, white and orange, white and yellow, white and blue. And then I'm cutting it on an angle on one end, fold it in, and then I'm rolling it up into a little lollipop shape. And then I have to cut this on an angle so it sits flush. And I always need to think of like which way do I need to do it. You need to go from the outside in. That way that bottom piece will easily stick to the bottom of the lollipop. Get a little bit of water down, and I'm doing the same thing. So I'm cutting it as I curl it in, and then just wrapping that up. And again, in order to get it to sit flush, I'm going to start from the outside where the orange is and cut on an angle inside. That way when I press it up there, it's going to sit flush, get a little bit of water behind it. and stick that down. Now I have a skewer. The skewer has a pointy end, so I'm just sticking that in there to create the hole. And then I wet the end of that lollipop stick and I'm sticking that in there. The lollipop stick doesn't have a point to it, so you need to create a hole first before you put those sticks in there. And let's set those aside. Now we need to cover the cupcake top, so I have a turntable with a piece of non-slip pad on it. I'm turning a bowl upside down on there, and I end up putting another piece of non-slip pad on here, but I end up removing it because I didn't want it on there. So I got that out of the refrigerator. That is really cold and hard, so I'm not going to mess this up as I handle it. Again, my hands are clean. I didn't show me washing my hands, but I always wash my hands before I handle these cakes, and I removed it from that board, and that cardboard circle is going to sit on that bowl. I didn't like that little pad under there, so I just removed that, set that aside, and put that back down on the bowl. And now I'm getting some piping gel all along that purple swirl. And I also want to get it around the bottom of the cake. So I'm not really putting it too much on that white icing unless it's at the bottom. So I'm making sure that I get piping gel at the very bottom. And then I'm going to get it underneath that board as well, because I need the fondant to stick to the very bottom of the cake. And then I'm going to wrap it underneath the board, and it needs to be able to stick to that as well. Now I'm rolling this white fondant out about 1/4 to an 1/8 of an inch thick, and then I'm going to cover this. Now this does have that Tylose powder mixed into it, so it's going to help it stretch and not break or create any holes. And I'm just carefully pulling the fondant out and then smoothing out any wrinkles. And once I was doing that, I felt like it was a little too heavy, so I grabbed some scissors to cut off the excess. Be careful if you do something like this, because I'm a moron, and right there I cut it a little too short. I was so annoyed. So if you're cutting off the excess, just cut off closer to the bottom so you don't run into this issue, but I'm going to show you how I fix it. Now I'm trying to stretch that out to cover the rest of that cake where I cut it too short, and I have some issues with it, but anyway, I'm going to show you what I do. So I'm taking my fingers and I'm just trying to press this down so you can really see those swirls that I made, and then I'm pulling the fondant out and carefully tucking it underneath to where I put that piping gel so it's sticking. But you see how those little wrinkles start to form? So you need to work in little sections so you can smooth this out. But because I cut it too short right here, I had to stretch it out a little bit, and it thinned the fondant. Oh my gosh, I was so annoyed. It just created a mess. Look, I just made a hole there. So I'm trying not to make it worse. Like I'm dedicated right now. I didn't want to start all over. So I'm just working in small sections and just pulling it down, trying to smooth out those wrinkles, and then tucking it underneath. Now I am going to fix it a little later, and I'll show you how I do that. That bad part's going to be the back part of the cake, and I'm going to patch it, so you'll see how I fix it. But this part is the hardest part, tucking it under here. I'm cutting off the excess so that way I can stick the fondant to the piping gel that's underneath the board, and just working in small sections, trying to get rid of as many wrinkles as I can. And yikes, that looks really bad, but I'm going to fix it later. I'll show you what I do, but I'm just taking my hands and just smoothing over this one more time. Just using my fingers to make sure everything is nice and even and the fondant is adhered to that swirl, and then I'm transferring it onto a cutting board, and I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. Now I got that cake out of the refrigerator. That icing is cold and hard, and I'm going to stack this so I can put that cupcake liner on the top. So doing the same thing with the straws, getting down some icing, and then I have that cupcake liner, and I'm pressing that down on there and making sure that hole is right in the middle. Now that's a 3-inch tall, 4-inch cake, and I'm just trimming off the end and then cutting it in half and going to fill it. Now I wasn't thinking, I don't know why I was doing it this way. I should have just filled the cake and then put this inside the cupcake, but I decided to do it this weird way where I'm trying to put icing on the outside. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. I should have just iced it when I was icing my other cakes, but whatever. So I filled that and I iced the outside, put that on the inside, and then get a little bit more icing on the top. And you see how it comes flush with the top of that cupcake liner. And now I'm just going to transfer this on top of that cupcake liner, and that cardboard circle is going to sit atop there. And now, do you see how that dowel, the point of the dowel goes all the way down to the cutting board, and I'm just measuring how tall my dowel should should be. And I'm pushing that through that cupcake liner, through the hole, and just hammering this all the way through the cake and countersinking it down into the cake board. I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator. I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And then I printed the name and the number out the size I wanted it to be. So I measured my cake and then I printed that out the correct size. I do have my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts PDFs, and I will link that in the description for you. So now I'm going to do my trace, cut, and smooth method to make these out of fondant. So I have that pink fondant rolled out really thin, and I'm tracing this number 1 onto this fondant. You don't want to press too hard, just enough to transfer the line. And then for the name, I'm doing each letter a different color. So again, I'm just tracing this letter K onto this pink fondant. And then the next letter I did in orange or in red. So I did pink, red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. So I'm tracing all the letters onto those colors and then taking my X-Acto knife and cutting all of these out. And whenever you cut anything out of fondant, the edges are going to be a little jagged. So I like to take my fingers and my tools to smooth all of my cuts and make it look nice and pretty. So I'm going to do the same thing for the number 1, cutting it out of the fondant and then taking my fingers and smoothing my cuts. And I did the same thing for the rest of all of the letters. And then I'm getting a little bit of water behind each letter. I have that white fondant rolled out pretty thin. I'm sticking all those letters down, and then, sorry it's a little blurry, but you can see how I'm like kind of on top of the letter to make sure that I'm cutting an even white border around it. And then again, taking my fingers and my tools to smooth those cuts, and I just cut an even white border around all of those letters. And then for the number, I rolled this white fondant out a little thick so I can get toothpicks underneath it, get a little bit of water behind it, and stick that down. And since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I need to make a guideline cut first. So I'm just sticking the tip of my X-Acto knife into the fondant to create a guideline. And then once that's done, I'm going to stick the tip of my X-Acto knife all the way down to the board and use that guideline as a guide to cut this out. By making that guideline, I'm not going to distort the top edge of the fondant, and it's going to be a cleaner cut. And then again, I have to take my fingers and my tools and smooth the fondant, pressing those pieces back down on itself. And let's set those aside. Now I got my cake out of the refrigerator, and let's start to decorate this. So I am arranging the letters so they're close together. I'm taking a little tape measure to see where the center of the name is. That way I could put that letter to the front of the cake. So the A was the center. So I always start with the center letter of a name, making sure that it's facing forward, and then I build out to the left and build out to the right to make sure that the name is center. And once that's in place, I hold up the number 1 just to see where I want to put it, and then I'm getting a toothpick in the bottom and then one on either side. That way it's not going to twist. And I'm getting a little bit of piping gel underneath it, and then I can easily put that down on the cake in front of that little cupcake liner. And now let's fix this. So I have some white American buttercream. I'm getting a little bit of that on a paintbrush, and I'm just kind of patching these imperfections in the fondant where I had to stretch it. So I'm just covering these little holes and wrinkles that are showing. So I'm getting a little bit of icing on there, and then I get a dry paintbrush and just remove the excess. So you're kind of just spackling these imperfections so you can't really see them. Now, this is the back of the cake. It is a little imperfect, but that's okay. It's really not going to stand out as much as it would if I didn't do this. Now I want to get a little bit of non-toxic glue around the edge of the cake drum. I also got some glue on the back of that ribbon, and I'm just wrapping the ribbon around the cake drum where it meets in the back. I'm going to get a little bit more glue down and then just stick that ribbon down and run my finger over one more time for good measure to make sure that it's sticking. Now I'm making the cherry, so I'm rolling that into a ball. And then what I want to do is take my fingers and kind of flatten it at the top, because there's always like a little indent in the top of a cherry, and then I'm tapering it at the bottom to give it a cherry shape. And look, that's perfectly fits in there. It doesn't usually happen on my first try. So I'm getting a toothpick down there, get a little bit of piping gel underneath it and stick that down. And now I want to make a little whimsical cherry stem. So I'm using this wire and just using my snips to cut it, and I'm cleaning the wire. And then I'm taking this tool and I'm going to wrap the wire around here. The wire's a little stiff, so it takes a little muscle to get it on there. And then it's just this whimsical looking swirl that I'm going to stick in the top of the cherry, and then roll a little bit of fondant into a ball and stick that on the very top. Now I'm getting a little bit of piping gel behind each of these little jimmies and sticking them down. So I'm trying to stick them in on different angles, and I don't want the same colors next to each other. So I'm trying to do an even distribution of all the colors. And you can see where that very back part where I patched it, it doesn't look as bad when it's decorated with those jimmies. And now I want to put these lollipops in here. So I'm trying to evenly space them from the number one in the center, and I wrap them all around that bottom tier. And then, of course, I need some curly. So I already have tons of pre-made ones. I show you how to make these in tons of my videos, but you just cut long strips of fondant, wrap it around a Dresden tool, and then get a little bit of piping gel underneath and stick them down. It just makes your cake look festive. And here is the cupcake candy cake. Look how cool that is. So there you go. How much fun is this cake? I just love this design so much. Now this was based why did I say it like that? It's based off another design that I did. And I made this cake years ago and she wanted something very similar to it. Now, I did have some issues with that cupcake topper. In this cake, this picture, I realized after I made this that for the top piece of the cupcake, I used a half sports ball pan. This pan from Wilton, and I baked the top part of it in this, and then I added that fondant rope around it. I think that's why it looks a little better in this picture than in this one where I did the top of the cupcake pan like you saw in the video. So you could do either one using the sports ball pan or the top of the cupcake like I showed you. And I did have some issues with this, and I thought it was more important for me to include it in the video so you could see what could go wrong. But with this technique and wrapping that fondant underneath, it's very difficult to not get any wrinkles. Now, it was completely my fault that I trimmed that fondant a little too short and then had to stretch it out to cover it. I was so annoyed when I did that, but I was already committed. I already had it covered with fondant, so I had to figure out a way around it. That's why I tried to patch those little sparse areas or holes with that extra icing, which would really only work on white fondant with white buttercream because it's very difficult to match your buttercream exactly to the fondant, but my white buttercream and fondant does match pretty much the same. So I think the most challenging part of this cake is to cover that top cupcake part with fondant and not have it be wrinkly as you're tucking it underneath. Now this cake on the inside, that pink tier is a 1-layer torted 6-inch, and the purple tier is a 2-layer torted 8-inch. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cakes, and I will link that below. It feeds about 35 to 40 people, and I totally undercharged for this one. I charged $425, and after I made it, I realized I probably should have charged around $550 or so. So next time that I make this, it will definitely be around $550. Especially since when you make cakes that have so many different colors, you have to dye all the fondant, all those colors, roll out all the fondant. That takes a really long time. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why I only charge $425, but whatever. You live and you live and you learn. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have ebooks with all of my recipes that I use. I have my best scratch pound cake recipes, my doctored cake mix recipes, all of the buttercream, icing, and filling recipes that I use, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts PDFs. So all of those will be linked in the description. And I also have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. There are 3 tiers to this program. The base tier is called the Cake Pop tier, and you can help support me monthly while getting access to early YouTube content and exclusive video content that I make only for my Cake Academy members. And you also get free and discounted extras. Extras are those recipe ebooks that I just mentioned earlier. And then the top 2 tiers have access to my exclusive Facebook group, and in that group, I go live. We're about to do a cake design workshop next weekend. And in that workshop, we're going to go over how to come up with creative designs for your cakes. I've done buttercream lives. I've showed you how to make marshmallow fondant. We've talked about customer complaints, about pricing, and we are having so much fun in this group. I would love to have you aboard. All the information will be linked in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. The link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials and you could check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.